Hello and welcome. Today, I'm very happy to welcome someone who truly understands how people, performance, and well-being come together in the workplace. Joining me is Mary Cullen, the founder and managing director of Insight HR, a fantastic HR consultancy and outsourcing company based in Ireland. With over 20 years of experience across many industries, Mary is brilliant at guiding organizations through tricky people issues while ensuring employee well-being at the heart of everything. Mary also hosts the HR Room podcast and a popular webinar series where she generously shares tips for HR managers and managers in general on everything from workplace culture to compliance. Her passion is helping HR professionals and leaders create happy, healthier, and stronger teams. Under Mary's leadership, Insight HR blends practical industry experience with deep academic knowledge, offering clients valuable and strategic advice. And she lives in beautiful Kilkenny and balances her busy professional life with family, friends, loving her gym, and cooking. Today, we are going to discuss how better conversations, smarter support, and proactive HR strategies can boost well-being in the workplace and help everyone bring the best part of them to work as at home. I'm so happy to have you, Mary. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
My first question is actually on the academic depth that you offer. How do you read up on new research to stay current and, supply new things to your clients?
I'm a reader by my nature anyway, so I mix up from books relevant to my profession, articles. I listen to quite a lot of podcasts, actually. I'm a real podcaster and I enjoy the variety that I pick up. So I could listen to anything from an Australian podcast to a UK podcast, right the way through to the range of Irish podcasts out there. And it could be anything from employment law to general HR to culture and well-being. It could be anything at all.
Right. And you have time when you go for walks, or when do you kind of listen?
My car is probably the place where I listen most. And like most consultants, I do quite a bit of travel around Ireland. Last week I spent 4 hours getting back from Dublin to Kilkenny. So plenty of opportunity to listen to podcasts during that time. It keeps me entertained and up to date. But I can do when I walk. I always find there's always time to learn. So it's
You're
one of the
always
key things
curious?
about me.
You're
Always
always
curious.
curious? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't feel you should ever sit back and be comfortable and think you know
No.
everything.
Yeah.
I think that's a mistake people make, and continuous learning and development is key. I'll also attend conferences and keep up to date and love to learn new things.
Mhm. So in this podcast, we're trying to help the HR managers and everybody that is in some kind of HR function kind of strategize a little bit and think about the most important things. And you've been supporting so many of them. But when you think about the well-being part of things in the workplace, do you think it has changed since you've started your company?
Hugely,
Okay.
hugely. I think for me, that's probably one of the most significant things that I have seen throughout my career. When I started in HR, I was 23. And at that time, it was a different world. It was very much more male dominated in terms of management and opportunity. And over the course of time, I have seen, care and concern about people's well-being, about their families, about their ability to balance their work and their life, which just
Mhm.
simply wasn't there for me when I was a young professional, if that makes sense.
And is this impacting, is it added on to the HR manager? Do you think this is like a whole new thing that has been added to the HR manager's list of things to do?
The to-do list has grown hugely.
Yeah.
So I think when you look at the role of a HR manager now, whether that's somebody who's in a standalone role or maybe somebody in a larger team, there's just so many things that fall to the HR function to take a lead on that really ought to be maybe a broader business issue. And so we're seeing in Ireland anyway, and right across Europe, a
Mm-hmm.
steady stream of employment legislation coming through. I know so many HR people who just simply don't have the time to update policies and procedures, or they hear about something that's happening around maybe menopause or men's health or
Mm-hmm.
female health or
Mm-hmm.
reproductive health or domestic violence or
Mm-hmm.
something like that, and feel they need to do many things in their role. It's not always possible, and it's a big job. It can
Yeah.
take a lot of your time, many of your hours, while we might look after everybody in the organization. Sometimes the HR person doesn't really have anyone looking after them.
That's a very interesting point. We actually hear from HR managers that they're very overwhelmed in their job, but they also hear that the managers of HR managers, like C-suite usually, doesn't really respect that when things are silent and moving well, that the HR managers that at their best, that's when everything is done well by a manager in an HR function. But then, that is not the flow of information about that doesn't go up because everything is just going quite well, right? How
Yeah.
would you recommend an HR manager to tell the C-suite what's been going on and supporting their information flow?
I think it's really important that in HR, you're actually supporting the business and that you're quite close to the C-suite
Mm-hmm.
anyway,
Mm-hmm.
so that you're operating on an agenda that's important to them, as well as things that might be important generally to the wider workforce. The closer you are to the C-suite in the first place, the easier it is to communicate the good work that you're doing. One of the challenges I see in HR is, we're throwing out loads of metrics around employee engagement and maybe things that the C-suite doesn't actually care about or doesn't want necessarily measured. And it's really important that you're measuring what's important to the business as
Mm-hmm.
much as anything else. Some of those are comfort statistics where we're reporting on a percentage increase in employee engagement, but actually the lived employee experience may not reflect that.
Right.
And it's important that we're measuring the right things, that you're providing the kind of information and the data that the C-suite need and want to be effective in their role, and that you're genuinely looking at the workforce, at the demographic, and understanding what it is that's important to the
Mm-hmm.
business as a whole to help it achieve its strategy. And I think sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect between the strategy of the organization, the strategy of the HR function, and the needs of the employee body. That's the first thing I'd say. Make sure you're in line
Yeah.
and aligned
Yeah.
with where the organization wants to get to. What's that
Mm-hmm.
future state?
It's about data as well. This is where we want to go, and this is where we are to the C-suite, right?
Yeah. And it's storytelling, isn't it?
Of course.
It's very much creating the story about you, and it's very much creating the story that's going to resonate with the C-suite. And I
Yeah.
think, from a HR perspective, we get very used to telling stories, crafting stories for the organization that resonate, that make
Mhm.
something real. Data by itself can be a bit of a turn off. We all know that. And just to be very clear, what's the story around the data that you're presenting?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think that is missing often when you send an email. There's no kind of story behind the data. What we hear with our clients, there are more and more sensitive issues coming up, both conflict wise, and people have, all kinds of backgrounds and diversity that need to be respected. And we're seeing more conflicts happening in the teams. What would be your first advice to an HR manager on tackling that, instead of going into a formal investigation? What would be the first steps you would recommend to improve communication and well-being?
One of the things I always say is that your frontline management are your greatest asset in an organization, but they're often a point of risk. in terms of their knowledge and understanding of how to proactively resolve issues quickly when they spot them, when they see them. And for me, one of the most important things that you can do from a conflict management specialist is teach your line management how to address things before they ever get to the point of a HR issue or escalated to the needs of a workplace investigation. Once you get to the point of a workplace investigation, you know, there are fairly serious outcomes for people. And if things are proactively addressed in terms of culture, in terms of expectations, how we want to treat our people and how each other should treat each other, then I think it's a job well done. So I would invest in training. That would be my number one piece of advice.
For
And
the
also
team in general then, or individuals?
for the team, right across the management team, I would train HR managers as well so that they have a really strong and robust understanding of dignity at work issues, grievance issues, and the handling of them. But I would also look at teaching people around inherent bias. I would teach people around handling difficult conversations and, you know, a really broad program around dignity at work. And that would be throughout the organization from information and understanding for the employee body and then from practical training, which is customized to the business and preferably in person. So people are actually learning and understanding and having opportunity to practice role play conversations and those kind of things. And I find over and over again that the more investment there is in development, the less likely you're going to have industrial and employee relations. But it's also got to be supported by your robust employee assistance programs, your wellness programs, and all needs to link in together, doesn't it?
And do you see differences in these issues, if you will, in kind of the variability of people in the company, like more foreign workers or different styles of people, or do you have more incidents there, or is it just depending on management style?
I see it as dependent on management style. I think in any workplace, you're going to have differences and diversity, and that's to be embraced. But the tone of the organization, what's tolerated and what's accepted within the organization is generally what will happen. Things can happen that none of us plan for, but in general terms, once employees are aware of the do's and the don'ts, and managers proactively address issues as they arise, you tend not to see issues in the workplace. And the more diverse the workforce, generally the more harmonious it is if you're applying the right approach.
We are very diverse. It just happened and it's so nice, and everybody kind of thinks a little bit differently with all these different peoples inside. When you work with leadership teams on training like this, what can you give us a story or a couple of stories on the aha moment that you bring in? Is there a couple of things that you always see the penny drop for?
Yeah, sometimes I'm really waiting for the penny to drop with people, and it depends on a person's position point, doesn't it? We all have inherent biases, and sometimes it's that aha moment. What was okay in my home as a child when I was growing up? What's okay with my friends when I'm out in a bar?
Thinking
Um,
about microaggression kind of thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because people come at things from their own perspective, sometimes people genuinely think it's okay to do it because nobody has ever told them it's not. And
Yeah.
so that aha moment can come in really unusual ways. Recently, I was doing a training program with a diverse group of managers, and we talked about a WhatsApp group where inappropriate content was shared amongst four men, for example. You know, I put it out to the group. Was this okay or not? And actually, the majority of the group thought, because it was four men, that the inappropriate content was okay. And there was a real aha moment when we started to break it down and really look at it and look at the appropriateness of what four male colleagues could actually send to each other during the day. And that was a real aha moment that, us in HR might just assume people know this, and actually breaking something down into the absolute simplest form for someone might help them understand it. So often our training around these things almost goes above managers' heads, and they don't
Yeah.
quite get what you're talking about because it's all policy related. When you bring real life examples into a situation that people can just grasp easily, it makes a
Mhm.
huge difference in terms
Yeah.
of their training.
And I bet you get their trust as well when they start sharing stories. They start being able to talk about things that they are maybe thinking about, but wouldn't
Yeah.
necessarily talk to anyone about until they get the space. So you must, be building kind of like a secure space for them to talk when you meet them.
Another example of something is we talk about jokes. And for most people, when they think about jokes, they think about something funny. But actually, an awful lot of jokes target a minority group of some sort. And when you look at something really simple like that and break it down and ask people to think about it, they can grasp more easily why they might need to be really careful
Yeah.
about the kind of jokes that they tell in the workplace.
Mm.
So there's lots of ways to bring training to life in a meaningful way and to help people really truly understand it so that they themselves don't fall into a trap of thinking it's okay, or when it happens in their team, that they don't just overlook it and say, well, what's your problem? Why are you getting so upset about this? That was a joke.
And can really hurt some people and
Yeah.
their mental health, even they can trigger some terrible things that have happened to people earlier
Yeah.
in their life. And this is what we say, if it's not on top, if the business is not talking about well-being and healthy relationships, it doesn't filter down. It's going to be hard for any HR manager, like you said before, to implement anything. So it has to be the line from the CEO, really. Would you say that CEOs in general have a hard time talking about their mental health to their teams, or do you think this has been changing?
I don't see a lot of that changing, to
Mm.
be honest, because it's a big job. There's a lot of people looking upwards at what you're doing, and there's a lot of responsibility with it. I think a lot of CEOs struggle with the idea of being authentic and genuine because it's exposing a vulnerability, isn't
Yeah.
it? And I think that's not easy for any of us to do.
Mhm.
The more senior somebody is in the organization, I think the more challenging that
Mhm.
is. But people, when supported and understanding the value of authentic storytelling from their perspective, is really powerful. I personally don't know any CEOs who have talked to their teams about their mental health issues. Although I might know a CEO who might share with me confidentially something that has been an issue for them, or some kind of a concern or worry or something that has caused them to lose sleep, but maybe not going quite as far as disclosing mental health issues.
And that's funny because there's a higher probability that you're struggling when you're a manager. And, people will understand exactly like you say, if it's a good story that you don't have to share everything, but that you have struggled and you've sought out help. Maybe that is enough. You really do think it's not hard, but it is hard for everyone. And stigma is still there.
And it depends on the culture too, how safe it is to disclose something like that. How might that resonate throughout the organization? I think it takes a big leader
Yeah.
to admit that they struggle. And, there's not enough of it out there. I'd love to see it, but there's just not enough of it out
Yeah.
there.
Well, I,
And
I've seen a couple of our
there's-
clients
yeah,
launch and say at the same time what they've been going through, and it really is powerful. It really is. Everybody
yeah.
kind of remembers this is a human as well as a CEO. It can be really hard. I know that. I have kind of a final question. Maybe you don't have an answer to, but if you would have a magic wand and you would just change one thing in a average company that you work for to make the well-being and mental health better in that company, what would it be? I think I know the answer, but one thing that you would change.
I think hours of work are an ongoing and significant issue, and that work-life balance, because people still are of the view that putting in the time and the overtime and the long hours is worthwhile because you're going to get ahead because you do it.
Mhm.
I would change that,
Mhm.
where emails don't come
Mhm.
late at night or early in the morning, where weekends are respected, where people are free to have their own time unencumbered
Mhm.
by the burden of work and having to get something done and work late for that reason. And there's lots of really large global organizations that have wellbeing programs in place, who talk about lots of things like diversity and inclusion, and do an awful lot of marvelous things, but won't look at the
Yeah.
hours of work. So
Yeah.
that would be one big thing that I think would contribute directly to health benefits, both physical, mental, emotional, and to a general happier, healthier individual.
It's a very Nordic line that you're bringing to the table here. Thank you for this. I mean, that was amazing to hear. I think a lot of people will benefit from hearing from you, Mary.
My pleasure.